Welcome and thank you for joining the session of the Risk Awareness Week 2019. What if I told you that half the decision you make will fail? That it will cost you thousands or even millions of dollars or euros, you'll waste enormous environmental resources, and when it comes to your health and safety, or even your mortality, it's getting even scarier. The risk of making decisions wrong are enormous. But let me first introduce myself a bit more. My name is Joep Steffes, and for the past 20 years I've been a consultant with a strong focus on decision making under risk and uncertainty. Depending on my client needs and the complexity of the decision, I've been playing various roles. If the decision at hand was complex in terms of analytical complexity, like multiple criteria with weighings, time discounting and modeling uncertainty, I would assume the role of a decision architect, getting the right content and answers. In terms of organizational complexity, like many conflicting stakeholders and goals, my role would shift towards a facilitator, getting the right people on board when making and implementing a decision. The past years, a shift towards behavioral decision-making is going on. The awareness that biased thinking could corrupt our decision is increasing, not in the least part due to authors like scientists Daniel Kahneman, Richard Taylor and Dan Ariely. My work as an independent consultant mainly focused on continental Europe and the Netherlands, but as you can see and probably know, decision-making happens everywhere and is part of the daily operations of every organization. So we must be really good at it, right? I'll tell you later more about how good we are when making decisions. To make my bio and credentials complete, I have a master's degree in business administration, a professional certificate in strategic decision and risk management from Stanford University, and I will finish my PhD research on devising strategic decision making in a couple of months from now. Besides that, I'm a father of 3 teenagers, play rock guitar in a band, and teach Shotokan karate to kids. So I have to be an expert in something, I guess. Let me start with an open question. Why should risk and uncertainty be on a decision maker's mind? Let me show you some quotes I found on the internet on how people get it wrong when dealing with the future, which by definition is risky and uncertain, when facing a decision. As you can see, Sir William Pierce, chief engineer of the British Post Office, said in 1878, "The Americans have need of the telephone, but we do have not. We have plenty of messenger boys." Thomas Watson, chairman of IBM in 1943, said, "I think there's a world market for about 5 computers." I do believe I have 5 computers at this moment at my home, so I think he got it really wrong here. Decca Recording turned down the Beatles in 1962 and said, "We don't like the sound. Groups of guitars are on the way out." Okay. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, said in 2004, 2 years from now spam will be solved. And the last one, Ben Bernanke, 10th January 2008, said the Federal Reserve is currently not forecasting a recession. So, if the future isn't what it used to be, how should we decide on the risk and uncertainty? Another reason why risk and uncertainty should be on a decision maker's mind is the success rate of decision making, or maybe I should say the failure rate. Research on the success of decision making reveals the following. Paul Nutt studied 350 large organizations in the US and Canada. He revealed that more than half of their decisions fail due to managers imposing solutions, that is not getting the right people on board, or limiting the search for alternatives, that is not getting the right content. Another research from a Dutch professor, Hans Schenk, revealed that merger and acquisition decisions have been even worse success rates. In 85% the expectation has not been met, 60% is sold within 10 years. So imagine the financial impact of those numbers on a national or even global scale. Billions are lost due to wrong merger and acquisition decisions. So, are other disciplines doing a better job on making decisions? Researchers estimated that the rate of diagnostic error in clinical medicine was approximately 15%, leading to longer hospital stay and increased patient mortality. Medical errors are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer in the US. So back to business. 30,000 new consumer products are launched annually. About 8% of them fail, due to Harvard Business Professor Clayton Christensen. In 2013, less than 1/3 of all projects were completed successfully, according to the Standish Group. To wrap things up, the risk of bad decision costs us millions. We waste limited environmental uses and even put our health and lives at danger. There is enough to worry about when it comes to making decisions. So how do we deal with those risks? Let me break down the risk of making strategic decisions wrong into 3 more manageable components. The risk of a flawed decision-making process and roles and responsibilities. The risk of wrong content, including missing risk and uncertainties, framing issues, and missing out on alternatives. And a risk due to biased thinking corrupting decision-making process. I will get into those 3 more in detail. So let me start with the risk having a flawed decision process. How should a decision process look like? Of course it depends. It depends on how urgent the decision is in terms of available time. It depends how important is the decision in terms of resources or money involved. And it depends why it's difficult to make it in terms of organizational or analytical complexity. One of my favorite and profound decision science researchers, Professor Ralph Keeney, states that the most daily decisions can be made by clear thinking or are no-brainers. A comprehensive process is not necessary when choosing what clothes to wear, how to drive to work, etc. Some decisions need a bit more attention, maybe by clarifying the problem a bit better, or describing the consequences of a decision at hand. Some decisions need a full analysis approach. Decisions on which market to enter or to exit, about our product portfolio, which business to sell or acquire, where to allocate capital, etc. Those are the decisions where much is at stake and failure leads to severe losses of money, resources, or even risk our health and safety. So let's dig a bit deeper in the full decision analysis process. The dialogue decision process, developed by US-based consulting company Strategic Decisions Group, centers on a structured dialogue between the decision makers or the decision board and the project team who assist the decision makers. Usually it starts with recognizing a situation that something has to be decided. The project team assesses the situation and comes up with a frame and values. The decision maker then approves the frame and values, and the project team can develop alternatives. After checking the alternatives with the decision makers, they can start evaluating the alternatives, and the decision maker can make an informed decision based on the analysis. After that, a plan for implementation can be made, which will be agreed on by the decision maker, etc. A flawed decision process could be that a decision is declared, the project team locks itself in a room and calculates a solution, and then advocates the decision to the decision maker. So there is no coordination, no room for input from the decision maker, and a black box of how decision is made. We don't know what alternatives were missed or why some of them were abandoned, how the actual pros and cons are weighted, etc. There is much room for noise and usually leads to a restart of the whole process, if it even comes to that. So use a more smart process when it comes to making decisions which count. Slightly connected to a decision process is the assignment of roles and responsibilities of stakeholders in a decision-making process. Or in this context, the risk of getting roles and responsibilities wrong. Let's consider this question. Who decides in your company? Is it about global or local decision making? For example, will it be a global product development, or will the pricing decisions made be globally, or will it be more close to the customer where pricing decisions are made locally? Another tension is it about center headquarter versus business unit or subsidiary decision making? For example, capital investments, are they close to the customer, or do we consider the bigger picture from a center perspective? Another tension arises when function versus function decision making is involved. For example, new product development, who decides? Is it marketing or is it R&D? And the last one is inside versus outside partners. If we have outsourcing some of our businesses, or we have joint ventures, or we have a franchise, who gets to decide? Is it the headquarter, or is it the franchise partner or joint venture partner who has decision-making authority? Wrongly assigned roles and responsibilities leads to slow down or even stall decision-making. The risk of getting roles and responsibilities wrong can be mitigated by assigning clear roles and responsibilities. The first one is, who is the decision maker? Who is the formal decision maker? Who is accountable for the decision? Usually that's one person or a group, like a board of directors. Make sure everybody knows who the decision maker are at forehand to overcome indecision. The second is, who has to agree? Who has veto power, a yes or no of the recommendation? That's not the decision. For example, regulatory or legal issues, who has to agree about IT architecture, about HR working conditions, about health and safety, etc. Make sure that there are not too many people with veto power which can stall the decision. The third one is, who has to recommend the decision, or who is responsible for making a proposal, gathering input and providing the right data and analysis to make a sensible decision in a timely fashion. Usually that's one person, an internal project manager, or sometimes it's even my role as an outside decision expert. The next question is, who has to perform the decision? Or better, who has to execute or implement the decision? It's good to involve them early to get buy-in when making decisions. Remember the research from Paul Knott I mentioned earlier, where one of the causes of failure was imposing decisions on others. Who has to deliver input? Usually those are the experts with a lot of knowledge about the decision at hand. It's non-binding input, they don't have a veto power like those who have to agree, but they are usually multiple persons with knowledge and experience. And the last one, who has to be informed about the decision without having a really active part in the decision-making process. Okay, let's move on to the next component of the risk of making decisions. So the next element is, what are the risks of getting the content of a decision wrong? It's good to understand that all decisions have the same ingredients. It's, what do I want? What are my options? What do I know or don't I know? The last is our insight into risk and uncertainty. To support those questions, I have developed a decision canvas, which can be used to structure all the elements to prevent missing important parts of the content of a decision. For example, in the upper area you will see what are our values and what are our options. In the lower area you see what don't we know and what don't we know. Those center around the context of the decision, which is a purpose, a scope and a perspective. Then decision logic and reasoning puts all the things together. And last but not least, it's also about group dynamics, about decision styles, and about the acceptance of the decisions. All elements should be considered before making a decision. The last element I would like to share with you is the risk of biased thinking when making decisions. A cognitive bias is a mistake in reasoning, evaluating, remembering, often occurring as a result of holding onto one's preferences and beliefs, regardless of contrary information. Biases can also occur from affective factors or emotions or even from social and group dynamic factors. Biases can arise when, for example, there is too much information, so we must filter it. Or there is not enough meaning, so we use stories to make sense. Or there is not enough time, so we motivate towards action. To sum things up, I have used the McKinsey model to represent some common biases. The first group is called the action-oriented biases, which drive us to take action less thoughtfully than we should. Some of them are excessive optimism, overconfidence, or a complete neglection of what a competitor might do when we decide something. Another group of biases are called the interest biases, which arise in the presence of conflicting incentives, including non-monetary and emotional ones. There could be misaligned individual incentives, inappropriate attachments, misaligned perception of corporate goals, or even pet projects. The third group of biases are the pattern recognition biases, which leads us to recognize patterns even if where there are none. For example, confirmation biases, management by example, power of storytelling, etc. Another group is called the stability biases, which creates a tendency towards an inertia in the presence of uncertainty. Anchoring and adjustment is one of them, sunk cost fallacy, status quo bias, or even loss aversion could lead us to do nothing or decide nothing. And the last group is called social biases, which arise from the preference for harmony over conflict, which could be groupthink, sunflower management, organizational pressure, or even dominant logic. If you would like to know more about biases, there is a cognitive bias codex on Wikipedia, which I have shown you a picture here. I think it's an excellent summary of all biases available at this time. There are more than 200 of them described already, and the list is growing. I'm not sure if this is readable for you, but I put in the link below in this slide, so you can check it out by yourself. So the next big question is, how do we deal with biases? There is quite an uncharted universe of various debiasing techniques around. I've made this overview based on the research of Canadian professor Dr. Pat Croskerry, who published over 80 journals and 30 book chapters on patient safety and clinical decision-making. I would invite you to read more of his freely accessible articles on these subjects. As you can see on the right-hand side, there are quite some debiasing techniques based on an educational intervention, like learning about dual processing theory, about simulation, about intuition, or even about statistical reasoning. Another group of debiasing techniques on the left-hand side are more about debiasing by thinking more or thoroughly about something, like thinking about a disconfirming strategy instead of trying to find confirming evidence, or by challenging the data. Another way of debiasing is shown on the top side of this overview, and it's quite simple. It's by slowing down the decision-making process. So you have time to switch from system 1 thinking, that is where usually biases arise, to system 2 thinking, which is more deliberate and an analytical way of thinking. Okay. My own PhD research focuses on various lines of defenses against biases. If the first line of defense fails, the second line will come in, then the third line, then the fourth line, etc. The first line of defense is motivating decision makers to put more effort into the decision-making tasks through incentives and increased accountability. The second line will be enabling decision makers to deploy more cognitive capital towards decision-making tasks through cognitive devising techniques, critical thinking, group decision-making, decision modeling, and IT support. The third line of defense between decision makers and supervisory boards would be agreeing on how the decision should be made, or by decision governance. The fourth line of defense would be monitoring the outcomes and progress of a decision by, for example, post-audit teams or review teams, and applying stage gauge or optional decision-making methodologies. The last line of defense would be changing the context of a decision by moderating the internal or external environment, the role perception of boards or decision characteristics. So let's get a little bit more in detail when devising decisions. The first line of defense was about motivating decision makers through the incentives and accountability so that decision makers put more cognitive effort into the decision-making progress. One way of doing that is calibrating the moral compass of decision makers or even of organizations. So the question would be, what's in it for me? What social norms do I strive? Which stakeholder perspective do I take into account? And what is the deeper meaning of what I do and of my decisions? Another way of motivating decision makers is about public accountability. So what if I would ask you a quiz question and I would tell you that I will post your answer on social media? Would you put more effort in thinking about the answer? I think probably yes. Another line of defense is about enabling, so strengthening cognitive capacities of decision makers so they have more opportunities to decide more rational. One way of doing that is training them or coaching them, maybe in statistics or in scientific reasoning. Another way is using critical and creative thinking techniques. Another very strong and powerful way is about cognitive engineering, like consider the opposite, the devil's advocate, or take an outsider view when making a decision. Of course, there's always the possibility of making decisions in groups, like the wisdom of crowds principle, or you can use decision models or ICT systems like artificial intelligence, machine learning, simulation, or data analytics. The third line of defense is about agreeing or implementing a system of decision governance like a supervisory board, procedures and decision protocols, or a steering committee. The fourth line of defense is about monitoring the progress of the decision and how the future or uncertainty is playing out. It is possible to build in time-layered decision-making like stage gate, product development, or real options when making decisions. The last line of defense is about removing or changing the context of the fertile ground where biases can arise. In practice, this means, for example, reducing dynamics or complexity of the decision through standardization or through hedging, insurance, just-in-time production, which reduces the environmental dependency and complexity when making a decision. Okay, let's wrap things up. Why should we care about risk and uncertainty when making decisions? We are not very good when dealing with future events, which are by definition risky or uncertain, which could lead up to failure rates of more than 50% when making decisions, with significant costs in terms of money, resources wasted, or even our health and safety. The risk of making decisions wrong can be decomposed to a flawed decision-making process and unclear roles and responsibilities, wrong content including missing risk and uncertainties, framing issues, and missing out on alternatives, or by biased thinking corrupting the decision-making process. We can mitigate or overcome those risks by following a structured dialogue between the decision makers and the project team when decisions that matter occur. Otherwise, clear thinking or a partial analysis will be sufficient. We can also assign clear roles and responsibilities to all involved in a decision, that is, who decides, who agrees, who performs, who recommends the decision, who delivers input and get informed. We could also use a decision canvas to make sure all relevant content, like goals, alternatives, information about risk and uncertainty, is covered. Or we could use debiasing techniques by motivating and enabling decision makers to put more cognitive effort in the decision-making process, agree about the process, and monitor the outcomes of a decision, or by changing the context of a decision. Thank you for joining this session on the Risk Awareness Week. I hope I have made you a little bit more aware about the risk of making strategic decisions wrong. If you require more information about getting help with an upcoming major decision or improve your own decision-making and risk management capabilities or that of your organization or otherwise, please feel free to contact me at the given email address or give me a direct call on my mobile phone, which you can see on screen. Thank you again, and I hope to meet you in real life somewhere in the near future. Goodbye.